pro-Palestinian demonstrators have committed to staging bi-monthly marches to Prime Minister Anthony Albanese's secondary residence, Kirley House, after a recent protest in one of Sydney's wealthiest neighbourhoods. The protest, organised by Free Palestine, a prominent advocacy group from Victoria, began early on Friday at Miri Booth Lookout Reserve, a park offering views of the iconic Sydney Harbour Bridge and Opera House. Around 8:30 a.m, the protesters began their march to Kirley House, located in Sydney's northern suburbs, which serves as the Prime Minister's official secondary residence. The protesters called for accountability from the Australian government regarding its role in the ongoing oppression of Palestinians. The rally's organiser, Free Palestine, sought to highlight Australia's political stance on the Palestinian issue, particularly its non-recognition of Palestinian statehood. During the protest, speakers such as Liba Abdul Latif, chair of the event and member of Wollongong Friends of Palestine, addressed the crowd. They criticised Israel's military actions, particularly in light of the International Criminal Court's failure to issue wider arrest warrants, and they strongly opposed Australian government policies supporting Israeli actions. As the protesters made their way toward Albanese's residence, the diverse crowd chanted slogans, including "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," and "There is only one solution, Ennahda revolution." These slogans reflected their demand for action against Israeli policies and the Australian government's stance. Simultaneously, political tensions in Australia's leadership played out, particularly regarding legislative actions that took place in Parliament. Prime Minister Albanese, following a series of legislative successes, reflected on his government's achievements despite facing significant challenges throughout the year. The Prime Minister had earlier emphasised his role as a negotiator, especially in the aftermath of setbacks like the failed voice referendum. Albanese remained optimistic about the future, reflecting on governance and how his administration balanced addressing immediate issues while planning long-term policies. His government passed a considerable amount of legislation, with 45 bills making their way through the Senate in 1 week. Key pieces of legislation included reforms related to the Reserve Bank of Australia and new laws addressing privacy, money laundering, and sexual assault testimonies. However, there was significant criticism about how the government handled certain issues, particularly the proposal to tax large superannuation balances and changes to migration policy. On Friday, Albanese noted the contrast between the successes and the internal politics that had shaped them, explaining that, "What we are doing is getting things done." In Parliament, some political figures, particularly Treasurer Jim Chalmers, voiced strong criticisms against the opposition's approach to key legislation, including tax reforms that had been shelved quietly after public pushback. Chalmers referred to the outcome of his party's legislative session as a triumph of outcomes over politics, even as others questioned the government's political maneuvering. Albanese, by pushing forward the legislation he deemed necessary, aimed to prevent opposition from gaining ground on certain issues, such as migration reforms and electoral changes. A major shift occurred within the Senate as Albanese and his team pushed through a wave of legislation, despite internal disagreements. The government's aggressive approach was characterized by a swift negotiation with the coalition, the Greens, and crossbench members. This strategy included using parliamentary tools, such as the guillotine procedure, to expedite debates and votes. Albanese's more assertive approach reflected his frustration with the slow pace of progress in Parliament, particularly when dealing with the Senate's tendency for lengthy debates. This flurry of legislative activity came as the Australian government continued to handle multiple political and diplomatic issues simultaneously. In addition to the domestic concerns raised by the pro-Palestinian protesters, there were tensions related to migration reforms and the handling of Russia's diplomatic presence in the country. The Russian government had challenged Australian legislation that blocked the construction of a new embassy in Canberra, with protests by Russian supporters outside the Prime Minister's residence highlighting the contentious nature of this issue. Albanese's government has faced challenges in balancing foreign policy concerns with domestic political priorities. Despite the legislative victories, he was confronted by critics who questioned the morality of the government's foreign and domestic policies. Notably, on the issue of Palestine, Australia has remained firm in not recognising Palestinian statehood, although Foreign Minister Penny Wong has suggested that recognition could occur in the future, contingent on a formal peace agreement between Israel and the Palestinian authorities. The protests and political debates converge in a wider struggle within Australia regarding its foreign policy and legislative priorities. For many demonstrators, including those involved in the Free Palestine movement, the Australian government's stance on Palestine reflects broader concerns about its international role, particularly in the Middle East. Despite significant internal policy achievements, Prime Minister Albanese's leadership remains under scrutiny, as his government's actions continue to be weighed against its promises of change and reform. That's all for today from Aussie Pulse. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more updates on Australian politics and beyond. See you in the next video.